Hello and welcome to our second podcast, or our third if you consider the first two parts of the first podcast on evangelism and outreach. And I looked at the stats this morning and we had 90 people, or at least one person watch it 90 times. It could have been that. So
That was me.
that was you. All right. Well, this morning we're going to talk about church body life. And if you'd like to start by just introducing us to that topic, and we'll go from there.
Okay, well, this time we're talking about what is the body? How does it function? What's the purpose of it? What is the life like inside it for those who are part of the body? And the first thing that made me think of is what exactly do we mean when we talk about the church? Some people think of an institution. They think of almost functioning like a company and something that will provide something for them. And if we look biblically, we see that it's really either a body or it's a family. And that's personally my perspective. Biblically, we see those elements coming into play. The church is organic. The church is an organism in many ways, and it lives and it breathes and it functions all together with many different parts. And Paul gave us a direct understanding of how we're all different parts of this one body, but Christ is the head. One of the things I was going to share was that part of what we need within the body is accountability and flexibility. We need to be able to count on each other, listen to each other, be open and honest with each other. We need to have a safe environment where we can have those kind of dialogues with one another. But also, we need to be able to be flexible. There might be times when a ministry doesn't quite work, or it used to work for years, and now it's kind of changed. And we need to be able to be flexible and understand that there are seasons for ministry. And notice I'm using the word ministry. I'm not using the word programs, because programs tend to go with an institution. You have programs in the institution and they set these things up and everybody files into place. Ministry is not like that. A family's not like that. You really can't categorize everybody into one or two little parts and expect that they're all going to be united. We really have to be intergenerational. We have to work together. We have to learn from each other. And this develops lasting relationships. So we'll talk a little bit more about how those things unfold. But that's just kind of my introduction.
What does that look like practically when you see that played out?
It's one of those things that we're not counting nickels and noses. Nickels, noses, and noise, I put down, meaning that it's not just about the numbers. It's not just about the financial numbers. It's not just about counting how many people were at an event or participating in something. That's not the measurement. And it's not about the noise. And when I say the noise, I mean the hoopla of everybody enjoyed it. All these things were positive. It's much more. It's us seeing and developing together maturity in Christ. And that takes time. And that takes patience. And one thing that we'll all learn is ministry is messy. There's a reason why the Lord also called a pastor a shepherd, someone who's watching over the sheep. And sheep are messy. They bite, they get hurt, they get confused, they get turned around. Sheep need to be tended, and sometimes even the shepherd needs to be tended as well. But it's working together that we can have a wonderful relationship. And practically in this sense, that means that we need to kind of break down the old ideas of what is making a successful ministry. If we see people growing in Christ, there might be 4 or 5 people involved in that. But if they're growing in Christ, if they're walking together in the Lord, and it's blessing the body, it's coming back to bless the body, that's wonderful. That's great. We need to be able to understand those things as we go into ministry, and not be afraid to try things that are new. in ministry, and even be able to evaluate those things that we might have been doing for years and say, is it really still giving God glory? Because in the end, whatever we do, it needs to give God glory. It could be from the smallest little small group, it could be a one-on-one mentoring, it could be in a whole congregational worship. But the question is, does this give God the glory that he deserves? So in a practical aspect, that's how I see it. And many times that means that maybe we'll have small groups, community groups of various ages or similar ages. But what we need to remember is that we need to have opportunities for those small groups to come together and remember that they're part of the larger whole and not just individuals. So we'd have to try to facilitate those type of things. I'm not coming in with a dogmatic idea of this is the way church has to be. I really want us to work together, to have ideas, to have influences, to see ministry as possibly seasonal, that there's times when a ministry is taking off and flourishing and times when it just diminishes. And we need to pay attention to the way the Lord's gifting us, the way the Lord's moving us, and really understand our times and what the Lord wants us to do at a particular time and season.
Are there any specific biblical passages that come to mind that really talk about the model for Christians and their interactions with each other?
Well, the first part that we can look is the book of Acts. And the book of Acts is wonderful because it talks about the community relationship, the selflessness of the early believers and how they cared for one another, how they watched out for one another. It's also in there that we get many ministry examples of what was going on within the church. And we only get really a couple ministry examples. One is when the widows are not being fed. Some of the widows are being neglected. And so the elders appoint specifically 7 men that will go and serve these women, and they're faithful men in that way. And so that becomes a ministry. But we also see ministries that weren't organized, or should I say, were not given authority from the session to do, or from the elders to do, or from the apostles at that time. Yet ministry was happening. We see this with Tabitha. Tabitha was caring for these widowed and old ladies, making them clothing and caring for them. So that's a great example biblically. We see from the lowest level of just somebody spontaneously doing this out of the love and the call for the Lord to have a ministry to somebody, to something that's actually ordained and approved by the apostles and say, yes, we need to have this organized system. But also when we look at Paul, Paul goes through many of his epistles and he gives direct understanding of how we should organize the church, how we should love each other within the church. In fact, mentions that over and over again. And John, in his letters, keeps coming back to love being a central function of the church. But part of what I like to look at is the Old Testament, because I think the Old Testament does give us an example of our relationship within the church, especially pastor to congregant. And we see this in the Levitical laws and in Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, the setting up of this relationship where the priests or the Levites were doing a function for the body. They were providing a place of sacrifice. They were providing a place of worship. And in return, the people provided for them a livelihood. And so this is one of those wonderful relationships that God gave as a vision of what was to come in the relationship of the church.
What would you say are the benefits to Christians of being engaged?
Well, the first part of being engaged or being part of the body is that, one, it's our natural aspect as believers. It's unnatural to not be connected to the body. Put it this way, it's wonderful that I have fingernails, right? But if I reach into my pocket and find a handful of fingernails, that's really disgusting. Why? because they're meant to be attached to the body. They're meant to be part of the body. Uh, we need to understand that we are together, knitted together to serve one another. And the benefit of that is we fire each other up. We encourage each other. We hold each other to accountability. If somebody's starting to slip down a path of sin, we're able to be there for one another and love each other and pull each other back. If there's somebody who has an encouraging word, we're all encouraged by it. If there's somebody who's brokenhearted, we can all mourn with them, but then help to gently lift them up and strengthen them. We need each other. The Lord knew this, especially in the early time of the beginning of the church when everybody was in pocket communities. The Jews were in their own little community together. The Gentiles were in various different groups and organizations. And if you weren't part of that community, you were nowhere. We've lost that. We've lost that sense within America today. And we've washed away the biblical understanding of we are the church. You and I, we together are the church. You can't be a Lone Ranger Christian or out on an island. You can't do that. It's not natural for you, and it blesses you. I heard a sermon example. This gentleman was a pastor at this parish for a long time, and there was one man that just would not come to church. He'd been a member for years, but just hadn't been coming. So the pastor went out to go see him because he wouldn't come to the pastor. He went out there, and this gentleman was burning things on the fire. It was fall time, and the pastor walked up, and they just kind of stood beside each other for a while. And the pastor reached down and took a log that was on fire and just kind of moved it slowly away from the other fire. And as the other fire raged and burned, that one stick slowly went out and went cold. And then he pushed it gently back into the fire and watched it catch again. And the man said, "Good sermon, Reverend. I'll see you on Sunday." And that's what we need to do with each other. We encourage each other, we strengthen each other, and it is for our spiritual maturity that we even go through the messiness of being together. And let's be honest, because there is messiness in coming together. Church is where sinners gather, and we know we're sinners. And sometimes we step on each other's toes. Sometimes we say the wrong things. Sometimes we unintentionally hurt feelings or misunderstand. And it's working through those things as a family that we become stronger, just like you do in your own family. When you deal with the problems and there's a healthy solution, we become stronger and tighter in love, and it just grows. But one of the things I think that is important, and this isn't necessarily a benefit, but a vital component of being a body, is we also need to be welcoming. We need to be a welcoming body that encourages people to come, that embraces them when they come, that loves them and walks through them. I'm going through Romans 14 and 15 right now, and it's talking about not letting your attitude or your behavior cause other people to stumble.
There's two last things I'd like to touch on today. I'd like to first talk about the importance of church membership.
Churches are being treated like vending machines or like television. If you don't like the program that you're watching, you change the channel. If you don't get what you want from the vending machine, you go to the other vending machine. You put your money in, you expect something out. And we have this consumer mentality with church. It goes into every part of our lives, and so we naturally think that that's part of church, and thus you get people church hopping, you get people church shopping, you get all of these different attitudes of what does the church have for me, and we get a sense of pay and play. You know, if I'm paying this much, you guys should have the programs, you guys should be the institute that I want. I've already said that's not what the church is. It is a body, it's a family, it's a function in that. And when you join, when you come and you become a member, you join in a deeper way than just being there casually, than just being there comfortably. You come there in a way that is vulnerable, saying, I want to now be held accountable in relationship. And I want to help hold other people accountable. I want to love other people sacrificially. I want to be able to love and care for the body sacrificially, also with my time, my talents, my treasures. I want to be part of this. I want to enter into that covenant relationship with this community here. And that requires a lot more consideration, a lot more prayer, a lot more of a desire to, when you are vulnerable, have people come to really truly know you and understand you. And I think all of that is part of why we have membership, why we include people in a deeper way, and we expect more from them. And also, there's more benefits to them. We expect more in their attitude and behavior and participation in the church. But also, when it comes time to voting or directions for the church, they get a say. They have a voice.
In closing, I'd like to read from Romans 12, 4 through 5, which says, "For just as we have many members in one body, and all the members do not have the same function, so we, who are many, are one body in Christ, and individually members of one another." Can you just give us some thoughts on how each person's contributions to the body impact the whole?
Well, we see it in this way. Let me go with the negative first. When one part of the body's sick, in our own physical body, the rest becomes dysfunctional in a way. If I have my foot hurt, I start to adjust with my hips to walk, and soon my hips hurt, and then my spine begins to hurt, and then actually my shoulders begin to hurt. And when my shoulder begins to hurt, before you know it, I have tingling in my hand, nothing even connected or related to where my foot is, yet look at how the whole body is connected. This is why it's important, as we are each having a certain function within the church, that we're healthy in our walk with Christ and healthy in our relationship with one another around us, building on that relationship, loving each other, forgiving each other. Some of the most powerful words you can ever say is, "I forgive you," and "Will you forgive me?" If we can share that with each other more, we would have a healthy, functioning body together, and a willingness to self-reflect, to say, "Hey, you know what? I think I'm becoming a hazard or a hindrance to my relationship with someone, or I've even done something that's hurt them. I need to go to them and talk to them." And understanding that we're connected, because so much of our society is so disjointed and so disconnected. We think that we're connected because we're on Facebook and we're on Twitter and all these different things. But in actuality, we don't have that interpersonal relationship. And that's what each and every one of us were designed and made to be. A little baby, when they open their eyes and they look into another person's eyes, a chemical reaction begins in their brain, and their brain actually starts to develop, because we're meant for relationship with one another. And I think that's the real example of the body, is that it shows there's an interconnectedness of relationship that we need to deeply have. And Paul, since you read that from Romans, Paul at the end of Romans reads off a list of all of these people that he says, "I want to thank God for them. Please thank them. Please say hello." And we see this network of people that Paul has in his life that he counts as the body with him. They're not all doing what he does, but they're all a blessing, and they're all needed for Christ.
Thank you, Pastor Jason, and we'll have another conversation coming up soon.